Let me know when we're on the air.
All right, we are recording. I'll go ahead and give the intro. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Ashton. Welcome to the AAAP Agricultural Project YouTube channel. Tonight, we have joining us a Celto-German American expert on Indo-European metaphysics, philosophy, Neoplatonism, Vedic studies, and pre-Abrahamic Germanic traditions. Standing at 6'4", 170 pounds, tracing his ancestry to the Norse, the Portuguese, Germans, and Britons, patrimonially descended from the Flemish settlers of the Azores, tracing his lineage to the high god Woden, an advocate of social Darwinism, polytheism, eugenics, and private communities, an ideological pioneer, Charles Rosenberg. How are you doing tonight?
Salutations, salutations. I'm just fine. I'm just dandy.
Just dandy. I love it. So, brother, what brings you onto the podcast? What's your message?
Well, I was just chilling, and I'll always take an opportunity to stand on the soapbox and yell and shout.
Hmm.
Sometimes I go out in public with a big sign. I'll write something on the sign. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense. It just has to cause some sort of a disturbance. In Mike Ma's book, Harassment Architecture, one of his lines that I really like is, "Some people go out in public and they fart," and that I think that encapsulates my ideas, my grand ideas of social accelerationism, which
Mm,
is a term that has been co-opted by many LARPers, many cringe siege type of people, but isn't
mhm.
life just a grand LARP? You can't be performative because life itself is a performance.
There you
That is
go.
what I have to say.
Well, brother, let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about this. I'm very curious. What was that moment that you had, can you recall, of spiritual or mystical enlightenment that sort of guided you from the little, chud cell toddler to this monolith?
Well, I think enlightenment is a continuous process. I feel more enlightened every day, nearly. Aside from some moments where I fall, then
Mm,
I'm like, well, I'm really scraping at the bottom of the barrel today. But some days I feel like I'm gaining, and the mind is a cup which can never be too full. That's what they say.
mm,
So I can't say there was one moment where I was enlightened or you know became a noticer, quote unquote. I think
mm,
I've been this way my whole life, and I've been building on it since I was just a child.
mm. Fascinating. An ever-evolving process. Well, what would then be your take on something like, we can start the basics, sort of like we have our rudimentary topics of conversation like politics. Where do you find yourself in contrast to other people? What's a typical shock and awe thing that someone can immediately kind of understand where you're coming from?
Well, I'd like to start off with saying that the left right dichotomy is completely fried. I
Mm,
don't think it works for modern forward thinking political ideologies because the right, if you look at the political compass, it's determined by political, or not political, economic rightism,
mm,
capitalism, this sort of thing, free markets, et cetera, et cetera. And the left is defined by their socialistic, characteristics, where I don't fit in cleanly with that. I'd say I lean left, quote unquote, economically speaking,
mm,
but right socially speaking. So I'm sort of in a third position here, if you will. I mean, I guess I like some modern American thinkers, like, obviously Nick Fuentes is like popular with the youth now. I guess he's like the big guy everyone loves. I think he's all right. He's not perfect, obviously, but like for you know, I guess he's starting his political career. Maybe one day he'll be a politician, a full fledged. I think he's about as good as you can ask for a modern American politician. Eh, no one will ever be perfect. You're never going to have like a Bronze Age God King, which I guess would be the perfect political leader.
Mhm.
But we can have just a nice sort of chuddy guy like Nick Fuentes. So
Sure.
that's my thoughts.
Right. He's sort of like the best of what we got. I gotcha. Well, yeah, in that case, actually, so this other half that I'm very interested in. So this sort of you know, almost pre pre-civilization for sure. What how far back? What is your extent? How far back does humanity need to go for the sort of salvation that
Well, I have this book I read. I said I never had an enlightening moment, but this book was pretty enlightening. Let me grab it.
mm,
A bit of a modern classic. I don't know if you could
mm,
see Industrial Society and Its Future by
yes.
Theodore John Kaczynski,
Uh,
which is what every edgy kid says, but
mm,
genuinely it's a good book, and I think that as much as he needed to explode things for his ideas to be spread, I don't think he should have went about it that way, because now he's only known as some crazy schizophrenic killer instead of the great mind that he was. I think that's a shame, if anything, but
mm,
it spread his ideas for sure, so he's not someone obscure like, Bowden or something. So I suppose that's good. But how far back do we need to go? I mean, some people say we need to completely eliminate agriculture.
mm,
I don't necessarily believe that, but I think we need restrictions. I think permaculture would be better. I think small homesteads like in the Nordic Bronze Age would be preferable. Nordic Bronze Age is like the perfect society, the perfect ideal society where you have the young men who are warriors, and you could probably assume that they were warrior poets like in ancient Greece, but that's really as much as that's probably true, that's like probably 90% true. That also is just conjecture, that's just guesswork. So you can't if we're talking specifics, they lived on their small homesteads, they had their long houses, their
mm,
essentially mansions of wood. Um, they had the king who would rule the land and the young men who would be the warriors. They had their aristocratic castes.
mm,
So I think all of that's fine and good. I wouldn't want to emulate something like ancient Rome, because I think that ancient Rome was the beginning of the end. Ancient
mm,
Egypt was the beginning of the end. I don't like those civilizations, those Mediterranean civilizations, and people of Iberian stock, such as myself. I'm over 25% Iberian. They like to always LARP, like they're the sons of Rome or something.
mm,
Iberians are another naturally barbaric people. They're not a Romanesque people. They're not a Grecoid people. They have a Celtic barbarian ethos to them.
mm.
So I think it's time for all the Latinx kids to stop LARPing like they're you know
Right,
Emperor
right, right.
Nero or something. Or not Emperor Nero, like Emperor Constantine, because those kids they don't even have a pagan morality or religion. They have a, sort of Christ cuckery going on.
Mm. I see. Right, yeah, almost as if, these barbarous people were playing pretend with civilization. And what I see too, and I think, to accentuate your point here, is that when you see those videos, like when I'm scrolling on YouTube Shorts and they've got the whole, like those diagrams where they show where, the Roman aqueducts and stuff like that, that these Reddit dudes are in the comments saying like, "Oh, look at them! They're so advanced as a civilization, like before us. Like, they really had it. Where did we go wrong? The Christian Dark Ages, that kind of stuff." And it's almost like what a fucking like what a cop out. Where's your creativity? Like, you're just gonna take
Yeah,
this
exactly.
civilized lens and apply it to all of history. Like, there was only one type of a good guy, and that was the Romans because they were able to like balance water funny. I don't know. Yeah. So sure. Um.
And and I'd say this is a unique position from my camp. My camp likes to often go with the idea that the medieval era was some sort of a dark age because it was all Christian. Paganism had ended. The art sort of, started sucking, quote unquote. Which, if you look into that, that's not entirely true. It still stayed just as good um, in a lot of Italian areas or areas where Romanesque art was popular, and it stylized art remained great just as it had been since the Bronze Age in Northern Europe. I think the medieval era was not so dark. Maybe religiously it was dark, but
Mm.
I think civilizations flourished. And as for aqueducts, God gave us rivers. We don't need to make our own, you know. God gave us rivers and streams where we need to live. You don't need to live in Las Vegas where you would
Exactly.
need
Yeah.
water being imported or something. You could just live
Mhm.
next to a river like a normal person.
That's, I appreciate that perspective a lot. That is very refreshing. Because
Hmm.
absolutely, it's like, well, what were the Romans building the aqueducts for? They're trying to inhabit like winterized mountain ranges. It's like, what do you like? You just don't live there. Go back to the beach where you're from. Go back to the peninsula. Yeah.
Or how about if you're gonna live in the mountains, don't live your civtard lifestyle. You can live a sort of you know, Celtic life. You can live sort of a Hallstatt culture life up there.
Mhm.
You can retire your you know, Italianism,
Yeah.
at the foot of the Alps.
Right.
Don't bring it in there. Don't pollute it. And Switzerland has done a good job at that. But who's done an even better job? Who's the perfect modern society? You asked who I'd align myself politically most with. I'd say Bhutan. I think the state of Bhutan is basically the perfect state in modernity.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Do you have like a conception, like a picture in your mind of why that is?
Well, they judge their progress on gross national happiness instead of GDP.
Mm.
GDP tells you how good the money's doing, how good the people at the top are doing, and not to sound like a class conscious Marxist, but perhaps I do have things in common with said,
Mm.
Marxists in this respect. I'm not scared to be lumped in with them in this alone.
Yeah.
Obviously, Bolshevism is a terror from the East, but they got some things right. You can't lie. And this was one of them. This idea that the money movers at the top are these parasitic people. They're leeches, vampires. Um, they need to be driven out, and Bhutan does not kneel to them. They have they care about their people before money, and I think that that's truly noble. And I think it makes sense that a Buddhist nation, a theocratic nation, would be so noble.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they don't allow immigration, they don't allow tourism or any of this. They have some tourism, but it's guided, it's tightly restricted. Um, it's restricted on the same level as like North Korean tourism or something. Not to compare Bhutan to North Korea, but it's like that level of isolation, and their citizens love it. Clearly,
Hmm.
they're very happy over there. Aside from some immigration waves to the United States in the 20th century, they've been doing great since.
Hmm. So you know your history, you know what you're talking about, sure. And I totally agree. Yeah. And that's fascinating that there's a specific example we can pinpoint like that. So, well, let me ask you this then. We'll get a little more broad. You were talking about Marxism and sort of how there's a balance that we can tread with that. And I totally agree because I find myself, you know, thinking or contemplating, and then it's like, oh, that's kind of Marxist. Is that like how do we so I'll ask you this then. D how deterministic do you find history to be? Do you side with, and this is as philosophical as we can get, we don't have to go much further, but I will ask you this. As far as Marxists' historical materialism, do you have a perspective on that?
Elaborate, elaborate.
They would
Like
consider they so the most basic example, all yeah, I think the most foundational thing we can really just cover would be the stages of civilization. They say that first we were tribal communists, then we evolved into the feudal kingdoms, the tribal kingdoms, stuff like that. Then you get to the capitalist industrialists, and then we will eventually evolve into the Marxists and the communists, the globalized race of industrial surplus. How do you compare or contrast with that dynamic?
Well, they're right in that there are stages of civilization, there are cycles. Everything is a cycle. There's no
Mhm.
thing that's a straight line forward and back. But they're wrong in that early people were not communists. They were very hierarchical. They were very you know, I'd say Darwinian in terms of their social situations. They had caste, they had the elites above and the rest below, and this was determined by not by how much money they had. They're right in that respect that we never lived in capitalistic societies like that, but how much actual useful things that they had, like strength, military superiority, divine right from deities,
Yeah.
all of these things. These
Hmm.
define a good leader, and society was always like that. Society always had slaves. Communism doesn't account for the fact that you need slaves. The only I'd say successful socialist experiment until it's collapsed due to warfare and
Hmm.
instability. Um, Germany, you know
Hmm.
that Germany, it had a surplus of indentured Slavic servants from Poland
Hmm.
and indentured servants of other creeds to support the state. You need that servitude, that indentured servitude. The issue, though, is when you have indentured servants in your society, they're always going to mix in with the society. Look at the genome of Icelandic people.
Hmm.
Icelandic people are genetically partially Irish. The more close to the center of Iceland you get, the more genetically Celtic you are. Now,
Oh,
it didn't injure them. Irish people have great genes. Irish people have lovely genes, great people. But when you look at areas like northern India, where the lower castes were filled with, let's just say, different people,
sure. Okay.
right? People of different Varna, I suppose.
Hmm. Okay.
The the harm was done. I'll
Hmm.
say that. The harm was done. And you have what we have now in northern India, which is not a great society like Iceland.
Sure. Right. Right. Right.
So
Hmm.
you need your slaves to be healthy.
Hmm.
You need your because you cannot just convince people to never interbreed with the slave population. It's going to happen. It's something that's inevitable. So maybe have Irish and Scottish and English slaves like an Icelander instead of Dalits or you know
Right.
Bantu people.
So, and that's fascinating because again, you take that conception, we're talking like, however long ago that was, that sounds like a very primeval period of time in which Iceland had this social hierarchy. Uh, could you speak to how different, right? Because Iceland turned out a lot different than America has, even though they both had hierarchy like that. Um, so I guess in that case, my question would be, does does race and ethnicity have a lot to do with that phenomenon, or how much influence would say like the stage of civilization that America was in? We had a very explicit, overtly, right at the peak. There's the French Enlightenment and then the industrialization of the world, which coincided with then what began to be the industrial cotton production. How do you see those two um, phenomenon interacting?
Well, very different things happened, socially speaking, in terms of reaction to race, which I did air quotes for because certain racial ideas, like certain modern ones we have, don't really hold up. Like, uh, you know, and this is a leftist talking point, but they mean it in a different way, so don't misinterpret me. But
Sure.
whiteness whiteness as it's used in modern times doesn't actually make sense.
Mm,
You have Sicilians included as white, and you know, all these people who, when looked at their genetic cluster, they cluster in with Lebanese people, with Jewish people, with all these other populations. They're not next to other Europeans. They're next to Ashkenazim and you know Syriacs and stuff. So I don't think our modern classifications make sense, but that's because they were born from America, essentially, from a time when uh, no longer did you have discrimination against, WAPs and mix or whatever.
mhm,
You had a time when they had to justify racial hierarchies by white and black. They distilled people, they made people lose their identities. No longer were you German, no longer were you Irish, no longer were you, Spanish or anything like this.
mhm,
You all became part of this mishmash, this melting pot. And originally, melting pot referred to European settlers mixing and becoming one in America.
mhm,
Um, but you have this grouping of people who have nothing in common. Polish people with English people and Italian people, and so that developed in America, which doesn't make sense biologically or make sense socially to remove people of their identities and just replace them with this, word white, which is a negative term as well because it implies it's not something that you are. In the way that Americans use it, it's something that you were not. You were not someone with a drop of black blood. You were not someone who was Mexican. You were not someone who was this or that.
yes,
And originally, it was also someone who was not of you know Italian descent, not of Irish descent, not of even some people would say Norwegian descent because they mixed in with the Laplanders.
mhm,
Um, Slowly, those groups became, okay, we're gonna say that their blood is allowed. So it's really a negative term. It's more saying I'm not this other quote unquote ethnic thing. I'm pure of that.
mhm,
That's what it's saying. And that grouping destroyed millions of identities and has destroyed people's cultural identities to this day. They don't know who they are. They just think that, oh, I'm this color. I'm just white. I'm just the skin color, essentially.
mm,
When race is so much deeper than that, it's so much beyond the surface level.
right,
And
right,
in Iceland, you didn't have that. You didn't have that distinction. It was these people are my slaves because we've captured them. They're of a different faith than us. They're Christian. We're polytheists. And eventually everyone converted to Christianity, and the slaves would mix in, and the slave master children would be, accepted into this society. Eventually, you have it to where no one even knows you know, whose mom was Irish, whose mom was Icelandic. Everyone's all mixed together
mm,
into this new Icelandic race. It's sort of the same situation in Latin America, but there's still discrimination against people who are more indigenous or less indigenous, But with Iceland, it just worked because they were two very similar peoples already, same levels of Yamnayan DNA, et cetera, et cetera. They just all blurred it into one thing. They Brazilified themselves, but it didn't end up bad because they were still, healthy, unlike in Brazil where you have mixing of people who don't really have compatible genomes. So Iceland just turned out great, turned out as a homogenous society. Everything went well for them because they had two healthy populations coming together. America, you have people divided to this day because they're not meant to be together and they're not meant to mix together. And basically, they're just completely socially incompatible. I mean, people evolved for, you know, uh, Angola are going to be different than people evolved from or for, Denmark. It just they don't meld well.
mhm. Huh, right. And I liked what you were saying about the conception of whiteness because you would think, like you said, that's almost like a Marxist talking point. But then the reflection of this, sentiment that you cast shines onto the right and the extremists in the right who want to invoke that whiteness that really doesn't exist. So it's almost like they are also playing by the rule book of, the last 200 years, whereas it's more valuable, maybe I would say, maybe you might agree, it's more valuable to play by the rules of 10,000 years ago almost. So
Yes,
yeah,
or
interesting.
at least 200 years ago even, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna go, well, I mean, I would say this, but I wouldn't mean what a lot of the other right people say when they say, I'm proud to be white.
Hmm.
There's no, you know, white is just simply not a thing.
Right.
You're Germanic, that's a thing.
Mhm.
You're Italic, you're Iberian, those are things, you know. You're Celtic, that's a thing. White is not a thing, you know.
Mhm.
And even black is more of a thing because all those people just came from West and Central Africa, same, genetic populations at least.
Right.
Like they have these things in common with each other genetically that when you just say white, it's mixing a bunch of incredibly distinct populations together, because the immigrants from Europe to the Americas are a bunch of incredibly different people with different histories, different cultures, different ideas.
Yeah.
You can't brew them down. That's a travesty, and
Hmm.
that is true. That is like almost like a genocide of these people's cultures
Mm.
that they brought from Europe, and
Oh,
now they're just being, boiled down.
yeah,
It's
fascinating.
horrible.
Right, right, right. And so again, here's this strange dialogue that we exist within, because at the same exact time, you can take these people who belong to the minority groups, and I've heard this before, is they talk in a very similar tone, where they say that the disillusion of we'll say African identity, it takes away from their connection to their homeland, from their specific people, from their specific countries that they come from. And so it's almost like they're right. Like that's chill, that's fine. They can play by those rules as long as we can also play by those rules. So I find that comparison very fascinating, very thought-provoking, at least, to say the least. In comparison to both the left, who might have something to say about being proud of being, a specific European ethnicity, but also the right, who have everything, all of their eggs in that basket of being white. So it's almost like a lose-lose. Um, but we will transition. We're making good headway here. We'll transition. I do want to ask about, so, you think very empirically almost, I would say. You can pinpoint, you can point to graphs and say, genetic information where you come from almost. Would you agree? Do you find a lot of resonance in that, style of analytics?
Yes, I would say so. I would say that I think I'm a very scientific person. I would say. A lot of people who are, more quote unquote spiritual would be afraid of scientism
Mhm.
and this and that. But I'm a very scientific person, I'd say, and I love, the sciences and this and that. But the issue is when people, the reason they don't want to be, into science or any of this and that is because scientism, quote unquote, has been used as an excuse to um, undermine religion.
Mhm.
Physics is a valid field. Biology, all are valid fields. Metaphysics is also a valid field, but metaphysics, not only did it get sort of, destroyed or maybe crossbred into different Christian ideas, and then eventually it just got to the point where it was wiped out by these new atheist type thinkers
Mhm.
because they said, well, since all the metaphysics we know are this Protestant biblical literalism or whatever,
Mhm.
and science disproves this, this must mean all other traditions are false as well. Every old study has its modern, improved form. Astrology turned into astronomy. Alchemy turned into chemistry.
Uh,
Um, and it goes on and on and on. But metaphysics is sort of just this field that now it's dead,
hmm
and it's because it went through this you know Christianization process, and then it went through this anti-Christian rebellion, and the anti-Christian rebellion really was bad for metaphysics. It was already on its last legs, and now it's basically completely dead. If you bring up metaphysics among, you know, a group of scholarly individuals, which I see this changing in Gen Z to be fair, but, maybe if you brought it up to scholarly individuals in 2018 or the 2000s or the 90s, they would have probably laughed at you if you started talking about spiritual matters in a serious discussion.
right.
But
Hmm.
I guess I see that changing for the better. But it maybe not. It's still over because when people revert to metaphysical principles, they're just reverting to you know an earlier stage of decay. They're reverting to orthodoxy or Catholicism or whatever
Right.
idiotic idea they're on to next.
Uh,
That's the issue with a lot of these return type people on the right is they're not returning to a time of purity. They're just returning to a earlier stage of the rot. You know, it's like plucking a weed but not plucking the roots. So the weed's just gonna grow back the same.
right.
It's not learning your lesson.
Hmm. That's a good
It's
analogy. I
ridiculous.
like that. Right. And I see exactly what you're saying, that this was a very gradual process, almost as if, there's like, they talk about the rubber band effect where you snap back culturally. Um, do you, uh, so obviously, I think you and me and most of the listeners to this would agree that there's this very profound sort of like culture shock that's happening with Gen Z. You're getting all sorts of, it's like a geyser of ideas and of conviction. Do you have do you have a specific sort of current that you find that's inspiring that within this generation particularly, as opposed to, I mean, really just a generation ago, the millennials? They're not quite at this level that Gen Z seems to be. Why do you think that might be?
Gen Z has been lied to and wronged throughout their entire existence in every single respect, in every single, field of education by their own teachers, by their own parents, by the world in general. And
Mhm,
the internet has given them a sort of way to connect to ideas that would never be shown in a classroom to a millennial or something like this, or especially not to a boomer.
mhm,
Um, they can see through the lies of capitalism. They could see through the lies of, secularism. They can see through all of these things that have been sold to them. And so there's sort of a renaissance of ideas, but as with anything, I'd say 99.9% of them are trash and probably should be burnt in a big pile. I mean, like, and that's always why, the masses should never lead a society. Most
mhm,
people are idiots,
mhm,
you know. These pseudo intellectual types, and I don't say pseudo intellectual in the leftist sense. I think in some sense, I am like what the woke people want to be, but I'm actually awake. I
mhm.
can actually, I'll use the same terms and ideas as them, but come to a different conclusion because I could just, analyze deeper than they do usually.
Yeah.
And they call people pseudo intellectuals, but I'm going on an even deeper level and saying, you know, this this basically Reddit liberal archetype of people.
Uh-huh.
They will say, "Oh, everyone's so heckin' stupid, lol. Oh, I freaking hate people because everyone's dumb." But then you suggest an idea such as anti-democracy, because if everyone's dumb, logically, why should everyone rule society if they're all
Mm,
stupid?
uh-huh.
And they'll just say, "Oh, wholesome chungus, everyone gets what they heckin' want, dude." Um, but that's just like you're just an idiot. I think, you know, I
Yeah,
think some sort of earlier, like even the people who invented democracy knew this. That's why only so many people were allowed to vote. Even the inventors of American democracy knew this, which is why they only let so many people vote. And
yeah.
slowly it's been more and more people have been allowed to vote, and it's just
Mhm.
been what good has come of it? I can think of zero good things which have come of it. I can think of a lot of bad things which have come of it.
Right.
Not everyone should have the same privileges because we're not equal. You don't treat unequal people equally. I mean, that's just you don't give a 5-year-old the same responsibilities as a 17-year-old. That's
Mhm.
just not how you go about things. And you don't give a 17-year-old the same responsibilities as, you know, a 30-year-old, unless we're in like Roman times when, 16-year-olds were conquering like, Augustus Caesar or
That's
something.
right.
Um, and in modern times, you don't give these young idiots the same responsibilities as a 30-year-old. And
Yeah.
in the
Mhm.
same respect, spiritual aristocrats and mentally superior people should have more privileges like voting, this and that,
Mhm.
than inferior people. It just makes sense. It makes sense. It's the wholesome Reddit chungus idea that lol people are so dumb, but actually thought out fully.
Mhm. Huh.
I'm
Fascinating.
I'm really I'm the I'll say this, I'm the true dark woke. People
Mm.
like to say that dark woke meme,
Yeah.
but it's only dark because they use edgy language.
Mhm.
I don't just use edgy linguistics for no reason, edgy lexicon. I actually follow through with these, quote unquote woke ideas
Mhm.
and go to their logical extent, which is third positionist social Darwinism.
Mhm.
That's just what it turns out to.
Mhm. Mm. So from there, do you find do you find much reconciliation between this empirical side where we can talk about logic and it makes sense, it's still in this realm of having this conversation, of course, and then your, inwards towards your own individual pantheon, do you find that the facts that you are perceiving in the world around you um, integrate or contradict with this pantheon that you embody, this conviction that you have?
I think that all the facts I find, that can be empirically proven
Mhm.
coincide perfectly with all of my, more, I suppose, abstract ideas,
Mhm.
things that you can't empirically prove. Like, you can't prove people have souls because you can't use physical tools
Mhm.
and, physical sort of ideas bound to physicality to prove metaphysical things. They're beyond the physical.
Mhm.
Um, so some would say above the physical, but maybe I disagree because I think they're inherently linked. You can't separate the two. Everything metaphysical has a physical consequence, and everything physical has metaphysical implications. I mean, that's just how it is. They say, as above, so below, but that's really true. That's really how it is.
Right,
Um,
right. Mm,
so
fascinating.
we're just a reflection of the metaphysical, or like, if you want to go even deeper, emanations from the ineffable.
Mm,
That's just that's just how we are. So I think it melds together perfectly. We could use these, empirical fields to study physical phenomena, study, all these scientific fields, biological, um, studies such as, race realism or this and that.
mhm,
And we can apply metaphysics to other things, and we could study what metaphysical implications may we conclude through our studies of the physical. Like, um, Latinos, for instance, they have we could look at their genes and say, okay, they have this admixture and this admixture. But what are the metaphysical implications of being the slave and the master?
mm.
Both, two wolves inside of you chewing at each other. I think that's why they're so crazy. I think that's what's going on with them.
Yeah.
genuinely.
Uh,
And you could see, you could look at their ancestry and you could see these reflections, you know.
mhm.
I saw some boomer humor webtoon. It was a Aztec priest sacrificing someone, and then it was a and then below it was like Mexico circa 2012 or whatever, and it was a cartel guy executing someone, and it's like, well, people never really change, you know. Even though, and this is another thing I point out, religion doesn't really change people at all. People are always going to be the same. You know, all those cartel guys are Catholic, but they act the same as their pagan ancestors.
Mhm.
All, you know, Germanic peoples are Protestant or atheist or something, but they act the same as their pagan ancestors. They have the same ideas, this and that. I guess the only thing which has really altered behavior has not been religion, but this new field of politics, really.
Mhm.
The only people that, you know, religion affects how they behave greatly are these people who become monks or, you know, quote unquote religious fanatics. But your average religious person, they're not going to let religion change them in any way, you know. Maybe for me, I've undergone some changes, but I think a lot of people would describe me as a fanatic. So I'm not like a I'm kind of an outlier. I'm not a good study to look into for that, you know.
Sure. Right. A good study in the course of this renaissance, like you said, and I like that word. I think that's a good way to put it. And we'll see how far it goes. Man. Well,
Yeah, maybe like a if you wanted to study eclectic sort of, or maybe not. Maybe I'm looking for the word, you know, eccentric
mhm,
individuals in Gen Z. How you had all these eccentric individuals in the 20th century as well. You know,
yeah,
like Benito Mussolini, and then yeah, you know, obviously the big guy, and all these people afterwards who were you know esoteric fascists or whatever. I mean, you had so many interesting people from then, and there was sort of a dip that occurred where all these interesting people like Julius Evola and you know uh I could think of a bunch of other guys, but I won't mention them for the sake of not getting too controversial. But
sure.
all these interesting people,
Uh-huh.
and there was sort of a drop off, and now they're back. Now there's
Mhm.
tons of weirdos out there again. Some preaching good things or okay things, like I'd say Nick Fuentes is a weird freak, but he has some good ideas.
Mhm.
And some of them not so much. Like when you have some sort of a transgender O9A advocate.
Mhm.
I'd say those people are incredibly interesting. I'd like to spend my time talking to them maybe once or twice or more if they have something, you know, insightful, but I doubt that. Maybe they're better as lolcows or something, but
Yeah.
there's lots of interesting people around nowadays, and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
Ideologically interesting, ideologically diverse.
And diversity is our strength. This is what you and I always say. That's right. No, I'm just yeah. Um, it has been a pleasure. We'll wind down. I have one last question I would like to invoke, and that would be assuming that the average viewer is not quite as eclectic. Maybe they don't align themselves specifically as being so. Yeah, I guess eclectic is a good word for it. Um, do you find yourself interfacing with these people often? And when you do, if you do, um, what would you say to to them? What would be your last sentiment you would like to share with the viewers?
What would I like to say to the normies?
Hmm.
Um, I think that it's okay to be normal. Never try to be something you're not. Never try to, if you're really, truly just a normie, that's fine. No one should judge you for that. There's different types of people in this world meant for different things. It's okay if you're not meant to stand on the soapbox and shout your head off. That's fine. You don't have to be that way. It's okay to just be a normal person. Never be ashamed of who you naturally are, unless you're naturally some sort of, neathing, disgusting, Okay, maybe you should have some shame then, but even still, having shame probably wouldn't fix anything. So maybe you should be drowned in a bog or something, which is what they used to do to those people in Iron Age,
Yeah.
Germanic society. Maybe they should be drowned in a bog or sacrificed or something. But
Mhm.
otherwise, don't be ashamed of just being a normal person. I think that's good. I think that's fine. One day there will be maybe in your lifetime there will be a strong charismatic leader who you can follow, who can program your mind and convince you to do their bidding. Whether that be a figure like Lenin or Marx or Mao or Pol Pot. I'm just naming a bunch of Marxists to not get into controversial territory again, because you could talk about Stalin and Lenin or whatever. You can't talk about other guys.
Right. Yeah.
Um, one day, if you're lucky in your lifetime, there will be one of these guys you can follow.
Mm,
And I think if you're a normie, maybe you should just be a goy cattle follower of someone who is truly interesting. But that is fine. It's fine. Just stay normal and stay doing your normie stuff. Try to do what is virtuous, what's correct. If you are tall and have blue eyes, have children with another tall blue eyed person, have a family, have a homestead maybe. But even if you're even more normal than that, have a house in the suburbs, just be a normal person. That's my advice to them. Don't do anything to try to wake yourself up. Just let things flow.
mm,
Just let things go. You know,
right.
maybe read some interesting books. I have some interesting books right here.
Mm,
I have I have the Poetic Edda classic,
okay.
and I have the prose Edda. Maybe I don't know. This one's less good though, because Snorri was not as good of a. He was sort of a bias. He tried to This is getting off topic, but he did try to sort of Romanize the Germanic pantheon. So maybe the prose Edda is less good than the poetic Edda. But anyhow, I have the Mahabharata. Um,
Mm,
this is good. You should just read these stories for their entertainment value, because they're really good books. And then maybe you'll actually pull something meaningful out of them. But I doubt that if you're just some normie person. So just stay a normie, educate yourself, but don't be something you're not. Never be something you're not.
mm.
That's my final advice.
That's fantastic. That's very enlightening. And it's very, almost there's no hate. There's no hate in that. You're just saying be yourself. And I find that would resonate a lot more than someone who only wants to spew hate. So I think there's a very, not particularly subtle to me, but a very profound, maybe subtle wisdom in that. Thank you very much, Charles, for your time. This has been sincerely a pleasure. All right, folks, thank
Of
you so much
course,
for
of course.
watching. Yes, thank you. We will catch you next time. Thank you.